we are now reconvening our December 10th, 2020 meeting of the California Fish and Game Commission. Before we jump into item number 27, I want to hand it over to our attorney, Mike Yon, to report out on the executive session.
Thank you, Vice President Murray. I just wanted to report out that in the closed session, the Commission deliberated on the 4 administrative cases pending before it. In the matter of the accusation against Aaron Lance Newman, the Commission rescinded the previous decision, rejected the proposed decision from OAH, and referred the matter back to OAH to allow OAH the option to either correct the administrative order or conduct a new hearing. In the matter of the request for reinstatement filed by Jeff Singh, the Commission denied the request. In the matter of the accusation against John Gary Woodrum and Pursuit Fishing, LLC, the Commission adopted the proposed decision. And in the matter of the accusation against Gustavo Gutierrez, the Commission adopted the proposed decision.
Fantastic. Thank you. So our next agenda item is number 27, conditional take of Western Joshua Tree during candidacy period. And I believe our attorney, Mike Yon, is going to lead this agenda item for the commission staff side. And then Director Bonham, I believe, would like to make some comments and maybe set the context for this as well.
Thank you, Vice President Murray. A little trouble shifting gears virtually. If you remember at your September meeting, you determined that listing may be warranted, and as a result, Western Joshua Tree became a candidate species. With CEQA protection, Fish and Game Code Section 2084, as you know, permits the Commission to authorize, subject to terms and condition it prescribes, the take of candidate species, provided that the take is consistent with CEQA. Based on your request to continue to explore ways to address issues raised at your previous meetings, last week, the Department of Fish and Wildlife provided 2 proposed regulations under the authority of Section 2084 to authorize the take of Western Joshua trees in certain situations. One of those regulations, proposed Section 749.11, relates to take authorized by the department for hazard trees. The other regulation, proposed Section 749.12, relates to take authorized by 3 local governments and can be broken down in several different parts conceptually. This is not necessarily the framework of the regulation, but one relates to hazard trees. It's effectively the same type of authorization that would be granted to the department if you passed 749.11. Second part, conceptually, it doesn't call out the High Desert Wastewater District wastewater treatment project, but that is a public works project conceptually, and the reg talks about that, and it's within one of the local government's jurisdictions. Then, as I've already hinted at, the reg generally talks about public works projects, and so there's conceptually you could think about all other public works projects that the reg deals with. And finally, the regulation grants the authority to authorize take related to single-family residences and accessory structures. And you can similarly think about those either related to the High Desert Water District wastewater treatment project or any other single-family residence. The department's proposal to you last week potentially triggers your need for emergency action, and the staff summary addresses the legal tests for what constitutes an emergency. I'm not going to go through all that again, but one of those elements is CEQA. And regarding the CEQA emergency exemption that the staff summary contemplates, I need to provide a significant update related to that second regulation, the local government regulation. After publication of the binder, The three local governments each provided an addendum to previously adopted CEQA documents. San Bernardino County provided an addendum to the Program Environmental Impact Report for the county's 2007 General Plan Program. That's State Clearinghouse number 2005-101038. The town of Yucca Valley provided an addendum to the town's General Plan Update Certified Environmental Impact Report. And that's State Clearinghouse number 2012-111021. And the city of Palmdale provided an addendum to the city's mitigated neg deck for the Joshua Tree and Native Desert Vegetation Preservation Ordinance. Those three documents are included in your supplemental handouts that were distributed after publication of the binder. Your staff has reviewed those CEQA documents, and the documents have informational value for purposes of the decision related to the proposed regulation. And your staff believes you may rely on those documents if you choose to take action related to 749.12. It's in a responsible agency capacity. If you choose to take action today to adopt all or portion of that second regulation, you could rely on it. I can, of course, help with a revised motion because your staff summary doesn't contemplate those documents that weren't available when the staff summary was completed. If you authorize going to notice today as a regular rulemaking for all or portion of that regulation, you don't need to make any decision today for purposes of CEQA, but those documents could be relied upon at a future adoption. And as you already mentioned, I think Director Bonham would like to address, and I also would like to point out that I believe you have public officials in attendance that would like to speak to this item.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. And I just want to thank Commission staff, and particularly you, Mike, for all the effort that went into putting together the staff memo and just doing all the background research to make sure we had all the information we need to make an informed decision. Also want to thank you, Director Bonham, for the extraordinary amount of work that you and your team have done over the last couple months to create the proposals that we have before us as well, and absolutely want to give you a chance to set some context and talk about that a bit.
Thank you, Vice President and Council. I concur with you, Samantha, that the staff analysis, particularly Michael's, does a good job of identifying those things you should be thinking about. So just stepping back a touch, some of this will be a repeat of Mike's overview, but I want the attendees today to not forget this begins with the Commission receiving a petition from the Center for Biological Diversity, and then referring to our department. And as everyone should remember, our department made its scientific conclusion and recommendation back to you that the requested action of listing may be warranted. And for several reasons, one of which was, the threat climate change does pose to this species, cognizant that you've never yet based a listing on that potential threat factor. So from that moment, of course, we've already been sued. You've been sued and we've been sued just on that step alone. And, the judicial system will manage those who disagree with either our evaluation report or your decision to go to candidacy. And if I could just real quick, I forgot to test with AGP. Could I confirm that Deputy Director Chad Dibble and our Assistant General Counsel Steve Ingram are also on this side of the platform? Because I think technical questions may come up. Chad, I see you.
I'm here if you can hear me. Okay.
Yep. And Steve Ingram, are you out there?
I'm here if you can hear me.
Perfect. I didn't want to get too far, make a mistake, and not have that lifeline available. So I think one of the really next most important things where the Commission and department are very much aligned, y'all know it, and I think a lot of the attendees know it. There is an ability within the Fish and Game Code to use a section 2084, to deal with a situation for, take impact of the candidate species. I think the use of 2084 should be pretty rare and not frequent. When I began as director, I've mentioned the commission was using the tool a lot. And I think it raises the question, what is really an emergency? And I know that that's identified in the staff report. So I think that's an important issue. So kind of at the commission's request, we think, and at the commission staff kind of encouragement, we have spent some considerable time, and I want to thank each of the individuals for their time and their professionalism. The department staff, I just mentioned, Curtis Yakima, who's, I think, the city manager of Town of Yucca Valley, Carlene Sackton, who's with the city of Palmdale, Josh Candelaria at the county of Santa Barbara, Bernardino, and Brendan Cummings at the Center for Biological Diversity. And it was really important for us that we not have a discussion just with one of those entities. The petitioner needed to be involved. And there's a lot of moving pieces now that we have this overlay of candidacy across a pretty good region for an iconic plant. So what you have in front of you is kind of the result of that discussion. I think you could look at it several ways. I think you need to be thinking about the California Environmental Quality Act aspect. Mike points that out. I think you need to be thinking about the emergency aspect. Mike points that out. I also think you need to be, thinking about emergency or normal rulemaking. And then, of course, the department realizes in the long run, it's going to have a lot of permitting that will happen around Joshua Tree through our other authority under Section 2081 of the code, which gives us the ability to approve individual projects by permit. So I guess the last thing I would mention is we're here, and I'd like to turn it to Steve Ingram to give you a quick summary of the technical details you may hear in the public discussion on the second rule. The first rule is really for the department to have an ability to deal with hazard trees. But the second one, 74.9.12, is really about 3 local governments, subsidiaries of the state. You may hear that it's proposing an inappropriate delegation of authority to those jurisdictions. And I would actually take a different perspective. And I believe that it's very credible to frame it as not a delegation of authority, but rather an approval of a program that requires compliance. The structure here is those authorities at the local level would have to follow the program identified in the rule. Their responsibility is compliance with those criteria, which allows them to then deal with their constituents for permission of that take coverage. So that's, I think, the more correct construct. And with Steve, I'll flip it to you. And if you could just, in really quick form, give the commission a sense of the key variables of the 2 rules.
Okay, good afternoon, Vice President Murray, commissioners. Again, my name is Steve Ingram. I'm an assistant chief counsel for the department. So with the first proposed 2084, the one that's focused on the department, this 2084 would allow the department to issue permits to remove dead Joshua trees and to trim live Joshua trees under 3 very limited sets of circumstances. First, where the tree or the limb has fallen over. Second, where it's leaning against an existing structure. And third, where it creates an imminent threat to public health and safety. And these 3 criteria are fairly narrowly circumscribed, and they're intended to focus on threats to public safety, threats to property, and threats from wildfire. In addition to being very limited in the scope, there's also limits on who can do the actual removal. If the dead tree or the dead limb is actually detached, then the property owner or its agent would be able to remove the tree or limb on their own. All other removals of dead trees and all other trimming would have to be done by a desert native plant specialist, which is a defined term in the proposed 2084 and includes certified arborists and a couple other categories of people with significant education and experience. And then finally, this 2084 establishes a very simple permitting process that would largely be able to be completed, both the application and the issuance of permits by email, which is important both for cutting down on the time, because many of these permits will need to be issued very, very quickly. It also cuts down on staff contact with the public during COVID times. That said, there is an option to use regular US mail so that we can accommodate anybody who doesn't have internet access. And that's pretty much it for the Department 2084, the 749.11. It's a very simple, straightforward ordinance that's just limited to dead tree removal and trimming of trees. The second 2084, the local government one, is a little more complicated. As Director Bonham said, it does allow for 3 specific local agencies, and only those 3, the City of Palmdale, County of San Bernardino, and the Town of Yucca Valley, to issue permits for take of Joshua Tree under 2 sets of circumstances. The first is removal of dead trees and trimming of live trees subject to the exact same conditions as in the Department's 2084. The only real difference here is that the 2084 would not actually establish a permitting process. It would allow the local governments to do that on their own so they could do it consistent with their existing permitting practices. But otherwise, the terms and conditions are otherwise identical between the two. And then the second category of permits would be for take of Joshua Tree relating to certain types of projects subject to very specific criteria. And I think, as the director just noted, with no discretionary authority by the local governments. The local governments would be acting in a ministerial capacity here, and they would only be able to issue the take authorization in strict compliance with the terms of the 2084. So there are 3 different types of projects that they could authorize under this part of the 2084. One is development of single-family residences. One is development of accessory structures to single-family residences, and the third is public works projects. All 3 of those are defined terms within the regulation. There would also be very strict limits on the number of trees that could be taken, and the limits come in 2 different forms. There is a limit that no individual project that could be approved could take more than 10 trees. And in addition to that, each of these 3 local agencies would have an overall take limit that would apply to all the projects they could approve during the candidacy period. And those take limits are 190 trees for Palmdale, 450 for San Bernardino, and 450 for Yucca Valley. And those take limits were negotiated between the parties that the director mentioned before, and are based in large part on past permitting activity in those 3 jurisdictions and their anticipation of what they would need in terms of permitting authority to get through the candidacy period. So the 2084 sets forward 2 sets of obligations. The first fall on the local agencies themselves. So each of them would have to adopt an ordinance that would require that any single-family residence, accessory structure, or public works project that had Joshua trees on the site would have to, first of all, conduct a tree census where they would count and tag all the trees on site. And then that they would have to avoid, minimize, and mitigate for any take that would occur of Western Joshua Tree. And they would have to do that in accordance with the requirements in the 2084. In addition, each of these local agencies would have to deposit $10,000 to offset the costs of operating the Western Joshua Tree Mitigation Fund and acquiring mitigation land. So if you'll remember in the Renewable Energy 2084, one of the provisions there was the establishment of a Western Joshua Tree Mitigation Fund into which all of the mitigation fees would be paid. And then the department would use that money to go out and acquire mitigation land to help conserve Joshua Tree. The fees that would be collected under this 2084 would go into that same fund. And since we required each of the renewable energy companies to pay $10,000 to help with the operation of that fund and the acquisition process, each of the local governments has to contribute its fair share as well. In addition, each of the local agencies has to make bi-monthly deposits of all the mitigation fees that are collected. They have to submit bi-monthly reports on all the permits issued. And they also have to submit annual reports on the survival of all trees that are relocated pursuant to the 2084. So then each of the project proponents must do a number of things, and these correspond with some of those obligations of the local agencies. They do have to conduct a tree census. They also have to avoid take to the maximum extent practicable. If they cannot avoid, they need to try to minimize take, and there's a couple elements to that. They cannot engage in any significant ground disturbing activities within 10 feet of a tree. And also, to the maximum extent feasible, they have to relocate all Joshua trees that cannot be avoided. And the 2084 also contains some guidelines and requirements for relocation. And then finally, if a tree cannot be avoided or relocated, then removal of, again, up to 10 trees per project is allowed, subject to the mitigation requirements. And for mitigation, a project proponent would have to pay a mitigation fee both for removal of a tree and for relocation of a tree. And they would pay those fees to the local agency that would then deposit them into the Western Joshua Tree Mitigation Fund. So the proposed 2084 does include a fee schedule. And it sets out different fees that are based on 3 different factors. The first is the size of the tree. So Western Joshua trees that are 4 meters or greater in height would pay a higher fee, whereas those under 4 meters would pay a lower fee. Trees that are removed or relocated on an undeveloped parcel will pay a higher fee, while those on a developed or already developed parcel would pay a lower fee. And finally, for trees that are going to be removed, they would pay a higher fee, and trees that are going to be relocated would pay a somewhat lower fee. And so, just to give you 2 examples of how it works, on the one end of the spectrum, if a project was going to remove a Western Joshua tree that was under 4 meters on a developed parcel that would be relocated, then they would fit into the lowest category of fees, because they'd be on the lower end of all 3 of those criteria, and they would pay a per tree fee of $175. On the other end of the spectrum, a tree that's over 4 meters that would be that's on an undeveloped parcel and that it's actually going to be removed and not relocated would pay the highest fee, that jumps up to $4,175. And then, depending on where you fall on those 3 criteria, the fee schedule ranges between those 2 numbers. So that's the essence of it. It's a permitting program. It does require avoidance, minimization, and mitigation. And I would note that relative to the renewable energy 2084 that you considered a few meetings ago, this one does contain a number of features that are significantly more restrictive and significantly stronger in their conservation orientation. One of them is the avoidance criteria there. In addition, the minimization and the relocation of trees, and some of those features. And then the fee schedule itself is actually a little more stringent than it was under the Renewable Energy 2084. And that's my summary. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for that, Steve. Director Bonham, were there any other members of your team that you wanted to queue up, or does that conclude the sort of overview from the department?
I think we're good to go and are available as the discussion plays out for questions in response to public comment.
Okay, Commissioner Silva and Commissioner Hassler-Carmison, before we go to, we're going to start with public comment with those folks who are elected officials and those who have gotten pre-approval to speak on this. So we're going to start with those folks first. But before we do that, do you have any clarifying questions or comments that you want to make before we go to public comment?
I just have a general question. So I'm assuming that all these ordinances would be enforced by the agency that oversees development, I guess, or maintenance of whatever facilities would take a tree, right? I mean,
yeah, Commissioner, I think the answer to that is for the second proposed rule, 74.9.12, each of those jurisdictions should be on the phone, the 2 cities in the county. And I encourage them, when they make remarks, to be direct in response to your question. What part of their government entity ensures compliance if you were to approve this approach to the rule.
And I'm just one quick question. So who administers the fund for the mitigation fund? Is that you? Is that the department?
That's the department, correct, Steve?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Hassar-Carmison, any questions before we go to public comment?
I'm going to reserve for after public comment. Thank you.
Yeah, same. I have some thoughts as well, but I think first I'd like to hear from members of the public. So, Sherry, we have some folks who were pre-approved, Josh Colandaria, Terry Rawl, Brendan Cummings, and then I know we had at least one speaker who raised their hand in the beginning saying they were an elected official who wanted to speak on this. And you may know of some other elected officials. So we'd like to start with those folks. And then I'd ask anyone else who wants to speak on this agenda item, please raise your hand on Zoom or press *9 to raise your hand if you've called in on the phone. And I'm going to take I think first we'll go to the elected officials and the pre-approved folks. And then we'll see how many hands we have raised, and we'll see how much time we're able to offer for each speaker.
And Vice President Murray, if we could ask folks to please, I think Sherry's going to lower all hands so that just elected officials can raise their hands first. And then we will go back to the general public. But Perfect. At the moment, we're looking for just those folks who are elected officials to raise their hands. And elected meaning elected or representatives of elected officials, including tribal governments.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, Melissa.
San Bernardino County.
Thank you for the opportunity, Commission members. On behalf of the county, thank you for your consideration of the item as presented to the Commission. The county has worked extensively with the department, as well as many other stakeholders, including the petitioner, Mr. Cummings, to develop the framework of the emergency regulation before you. We appreciate the partnership during this process to establish a temporary solution during this study period. While we remain concerned about the potential listing, we greatly appreciate the collaborative approach has been demonstrated thus far. Lastly, I'd like to highlight the county shares the goals of conservation with the many diverse interests in our community, as well as the commissions. To the commissioner's question, we have two departments, Building Safety and Code Enforcement, that handles enforcement. Our Director of Land Use is available to answer any technical questions or speak to the necessity of the projects in our region, the importance of them moving forward if the commissioner have any questions. Thank you.
Carlene Saxton.
Thank you. This is Carlene Saxton from the city of Palmdale. First, we would just like to thank the commissioners for hearing this item and also for the help from the department, specifically Director Bonham and Chad Dibble and Stephen. It's been wonderful working with the other jurisdictions. We're available for questions. To respond to Commissioner Silva's question about enforcement, we have a code enforcement division within our city. Also, our acting director of planning is on the line, and they will be the ones who would be issuing these permits and keeping track of it and reporting back to the department going forward. We are available for any questions. Thank you so much.
Vice President Murray, there is an individual, we recognize a name from a letter, but there's a phone number. I don't know who that might be. Should I call on that person at the phone number?
Yeah. Let's see if that person is an elected official or tribal representative.
Phone number ending in 171. You need to unmute yourself using *6. All right, we'll go on to Brendan Cummings. Brendan Cummings, go ahead.
Good morning, Brendan Cummings, Center for Biological Diversity. I'd like to start by thanking department and commission staff who put so much effort into these proposals, as well as the staff from the local jurisdictions who are also involved. I also feel compelled to reiterate the purpose behind the petition. The goal was and remains to get climate-informed, landscape-level conservation planning for the Western Joshua Tree. Such a planning effort will not just increase the odds of the tree surviving the very difficult decades ahead, but will also ideally ensure that any further development in its habitat is done more sustainably. In that context, whether it's via 2084 regulation, 2081 permit, or eventually an NCCP, some take of the species from construction activity is pretty much a given. The question is, what does it look like and how protective for the trees is it? First, the easy part. For the 2084, which is limited to dead trees and trimming of hazard trees, I have no real concerns. How to deal with such trees has probably been the #1 issue that has been asked about over the past 6 months. And because it will be implemented by the department, I have confidence it will be properly administered and enforced. Moving forward with this today seems appropriate, so I agree with the commission staff recommendation here. As for the 2084 addressing single-family homes and public works projects, that is much more complicated. Substantively, it is not the rule I would write if I were in charge, and I would certainly like to see more explicit conservation built into it. That said, the permitting regime it requires is much more protective of Joshua trees than existed prior to the species becoming a candidate. Given that this would be an interim authorization that would only apply during candidacy, and that it has caps on the number of trees impacted, ultimately, if the commission adopts it, I can live with that. However, procedurally, I agree with the commission staff conclusion that parts of the rule are hard to characterize as meeting the criteria for an emergency rulemaking. Moreover, given the complexity of the rule and the fact that rule language and supporting documents only became public in the last few days, effectively precluding written comments, I think as a matter of good policy, providing more opportunity for public engagement is wise. Therefore, noticing this as a proposed rulemaking rather than fully adopting it today makes sense to me. Finally, as you will likely hear concerns today about the local jurisdiction's capacity to effectively administer and enforce the proposed rule. I share some of those concerns. And while the rule has some safeguards such as reporting requirements, moving forward, we should have as much transparency as possible, including making the permit information publicly available with periodic reports back to the commission. If we do so, hopefully the large gap in trust between the jurisdictions and their constituencies can be narrowed and we can better work together to protect our Joshua trees. Thank you.
Vice President Murray, we have no other, I think Ms. Musser-Lopez is an elected official. I'll allow her to speak next. Ruth Musser-Lopez?
Yes, I am Ruth Musser-Lopez, but I want to clarify that I do not hold an elected seat per se, but I was elected during the primary as a top Dem for Senate District 16, which is one of the largest Senate districts in the state physically, and it includes Barongo Valley. And I think part of Palmdale or nearby, but not LA County. But anyway, I just want to say that, this emergency taking of Joshua trees, I mean, to call it an emergency taking for vacation homes is a joke. And when I found out from Brendan right now that you didn't even let us have time for public or written comment, that's why now I understand why I'm sitting here waiting all day for this meeting. And it's not fair. But the main thing I noticed while you were talking, I think it was Steve Ingram or one of your staff people presented, I noticed that you have no zoning plan. It's just like a willy-nilly take. And so I agree with Brendan that this is presumptuous. It's too early to make. This should be a proposed rulemaking. And you shouldn't establish this today for the reasons Brendan said, but also because it's not well thought out to the extent that, I mean, yeah, I agree that you have really taken some steps, some thoughtful steps, to distinguish between the large and the small Joshua trees. And, the very large ones should be protected. And so you're on the right track, but you're not there yet. And I want to read to you something that if you think that these local public officials are going to implement these rules for you, you're mistaken. You don't understand San Bernardino County at all. This is not, San Bernardino County is a very red county. It's not like the rest of the state. Our supervisor, Robert Levingood, I'm going to quote him what I just got today. And he's talking about Western Joshua trees opposed to Eastern Joshua trees. And he even mentioned Central Joshua trees, which are right down the middle of the I-15, and the I-15 separates the two, Eastern and Western. So you're going to have a bit, okay. And then he calls us extremists, people who want to protect this Joshua tree, this holy, sacred habitat that birds, butterflies, animals of all kinds. I mean, the climate is so important to our whole desert environment there. And he wants to call us extremists and that we're shutting down more and more of our desert. And then he says, and this is a quote, when extremists come to town, I encourage every hotel, restaurant, and every other employer to decline their business. Until we start standing up, the cuckoos will prevail. Okay, that's unquote. That's what he thinks of people. And you're putting him in charge. You're putting him in charge of protecting this sacred specimen. I have other things to say. I'm going to go up to say it. That's why I have to put things in writing. I don't see how you can pass this. I'll tell you what, I will write to Gavin Newsom. If you pass this today, I'm going to be really furious. And you're not going to, you're going to hear from her.
Thank you. Thank you. So Sherry, I think we've got Curtis from the city of Yucca Valley. If you could allow him to speak.
Curtis, your line's open. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Vice President Murray, Commission members. On behalf of the town of Yucca Valley, thank you for considering this item this afternoon. Over the past 6 weeks, the town of Yucca Valley, the city of Palmdale, the county of San Bernardino, and the Center for Biological Diversity worked collaboratively with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to develop a framework for the emergency regulation before you this afternoon. As you know, that process was challenging, but we believe all parties worked to support an interim solution during this candidacy period. We do want to thank the department for their technical expertise, for their collaboration and guidance as we work through this, and for the other parties. And we look forward to moving this draft regulation as it's developed through an implementing ordinance for our town council consideration for their potential consideration and approval. So just with respect to the question on enforcement, code enforcement, as you know, code enforcement is a critical function of local government. We will continue to be diligent and utilize any and all tools that we have in our toolbox for the enforcement of town regulations. Thank you again, and we'd be happy to answer questions as they come up this afternoon.
Thank you. And with that, I think, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we haven't heard, I don't think, from Josh or Terry. I don't see their names, but I think that's all the elected officials that we have before we open it up more generally. Do I have that right, Melissa? You are muted, Melissa.
I think you heard from Josh.
Oh, we did hear from Josh.
It was open for the county.
Yeah,
That's right.
thank you.
And Terry?
I think he made reference to Terry being on the line and available for answering questions.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will open it up to general public comment. So please raise your hand or press *9 if you would like to give comment on this agenda item. I do want to take this opportunity to ask that folks keep their comments civil and respectful and professional. We understand this is an item that a lot of folks have much passion about, but it is, a formal public meeting, and I think we are well served by all working together collaboratively as a team on this versus pointing fingers. And so if we can keep it civil, I think it would serve all of us. All right, so seeing some hands go up, and I suspect we will have more. I think for this agenda item, we are going to do 1 minute just because we do have a lot of speakers and I suspect we're going to get even more. So Sherry, if you could set the clock to 1 minute and start going through the queue.
Phone caller with number ending in 171. You need to unmute yourself using *6. Okay, we'll move on to the next caller. Susan Nash. You need to unmute yourself.
See. Good morning, Commissioners.
Sorry about that. That was me. You know.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. This is not an emergency. I'm the attorney who's filed a lawsuit challenging the emergency status of the solar regulation that you passed that didn't even have any conditions in it. This does not need to immediately happen. And what you have done is said, if we can come up with some kind of an emergency like climate change, then we never have to do CEQA for anything, let alone an endangered species. This is in violation of your supposedly integrity and transparency. I was just reading over your mission statement. I don't believe that any delegation of authority outside of an NCCP to allow the cities to issue take permits is legal. And I would ask you to take this off calendar, prepare a CEQA document, and put it back on calendar again. Thank you.
Greg Vara. You need to unmute yourself. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Greg Vara. I'm a homeowner and taxpayer in the town of Yucca Valley. I'm here today to express my opposition to giving the town of Yucca Valley, Palmdale, the county of San Bernardino a blanket 2084 exemption and prefer the 2081 incidental take permit. In a recent Yucca Valley Planning Commission meeting, November 16th of this year, a local developer presented an MPP plan for a single family home on a 1.7 acre parcel where there were 20 Western Joshua trees on the parcel. The proposed home was 2,435 square feet, and the developer's plan situated the home on the parcel without needing to take any of the Western Joshua trees. This is one of Yucca Valley's developers who was notorious for scraping and clearing raw land before building on it. My point is bringing this up is to point out that developers can and will build around Western Joshua trees when it is mandated. Therefore, if Yucca Valley Township, I had, can you still hear me? Yeah, I had actually thought that we had 3 minutes, and so I had more. But I just wanted to point out that it can be done. And I also wanted to talk about Robert Lovingood, Supervisor Robin Lovingood's climate denying email that he sent out, and just basically calling us extremists and that, calling that the environmental fairy tales that the Western Joshua tree dying out is scientifically unsubstantiated hypothesis. And he,
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, we can be a bit lenient, but we do have a lot of speakers. So if we could try to keep it to around 1 minute for speakers, we'd be most appreciative.
Thank you, Vice President Murray.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Susie Boyd.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Commissioners, and thank you for taking the time to review our comments. I'm Susie Boyd, Public Policy Coordinator with Mojave Desert Land Trust, speaking on behalf of our organization's Executive Director, Gary Hund, who has lengthy experience as a biologist with California State Parks and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We are committed to acquisition and stewardship of desert lands across the entire California Desert Conservation Area, including Western Joshua Tree woodlands. Regarding the 2084 permit provisions addressing removal of dead Joshua trees and trimming of hazardous trees, we have no substantial objections. Regarding the 28-4 permit provision addressing single-family homes and public works projects requested by various local governments, we would like to see additional conservation measures built into the permit. For example, areas that have been identified for conservation should be excluded from the permit, and consideration should be given to placing greater valuation on small trees, as they are the future of the species. We believe additional review time is warranted given the complexity of the rule and the late release of rule language, which limits the opportunity for public input. Thank you for consideration of our comments.
Chris Clark?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Madam Vice President, Commissioners, CDFW staff, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. I want to echo Ms. Boyd's request for more time to look at the rules that are proposed today. A couple of days. I understand that you're trying to move heaven and earth to get things done in weird circumstances, but it really is not enough time to intelligently comment on a significant and nuanced issue like this. I also want to expand slightly on Ms. Musser-Lopez's reference to Robert Lovingood's email. The most troubling thing about which was just a flagrant misrepresentation of the facts about the species of Joshua tree that we're talking about. I have a lot of faith in the staff of San Bernardino County, but I think that we have seen what happens when staff are trying to do the right thing and elected leaders weigh in with factual opinions. I just think that it's premature to entrust Yucca Valley or San Bernardino County with the ability to regulate these take permits. Thank you.
Deborah Savitt?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I am an elected representative of AD 42 Central Committee, County of San Bernardino. So this is very concerning to me to see Mr. Lovingood's comments on the County of San Bernardino page as an official document. He does state that there is no proof that there's climate change has affected Joshua trees. And I'm in agreement with everyone else that's discussed this. This is terrible for our county leaders to be writing that on a page. I also do not have a lot of confidence, sorry, Curtis, in our local town council of Yucca Valley. I was one who personally audited over 100 permits, and they did not have the photos or maps, and everything was not organized. They were not checking on the trees. And so now they're putting everything together. I'm glad you're all working together. Thank you. But I still don't trust them. I don't feel that they will properly protect the trees. And so please do not make that decision yet. I would like to recommend that we have a local committee formed of environmentalists or activists that can oversee our local town of Yucca Valley in reference to these trees. Thank you very much.
Miriam Seeger.
Hi there. Thanks for the really comprehensive draft, which was a lot to dig through in a really short period of time. I wanted to mention a couple of things regarding one, reporting to code enforcement. We recently tried to make a code enforcement report about illegal grading over a mapped blue line stream. And we were told that they were 12 weeks out in sending an officer. Now, we did call the department hotline and a warden came out right away and it got taken care of. Secondly, on the issue of translocations, having been involved in the now defunct San Bernardino County adoption program, there were some, I feel that recipients should also be charged a small fee when they receive trees, because this is a way of ensuring that people will take good care to read about the follow-up care of these trees. And then lastly, the 3-year. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Craig Morton.
Yeah, hi, can you guys hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, hi. So my name's Craig Morton, and I'm a resident in Joshua Tree, and I've been out here for a number of years in kind of a somewhat more of a remote area, not right in town. And I'm concerned with all the development that's going on, as a lot of locals are and people that have been here for a while. And single family home, yeah, that could mean a lot. That's, that's kind of unclear. So I'm definitely not in favor of this overall exception. I just say that I think exceptions should be by a special case, not the rule. It seems like you're making it the rule, and there might be, exceptions to that. But it's just my general feeling that it's a beautiful plant, and if it was an animal, there probably wouldn't be so many exceptions made for something, as beautiful as the Joshua Tree is. That's why you're considering it. So I think I'm just overall against it, but I think exceptions could be allowed in cases.
Patricia Clark.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, honorable commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I realize we don't have much time. My name is Patricia Lieber Clark, and I'm a graduate student at UC San Diego. I'm here to ask the commission to refrain from approving conditional take regulations under section 749.12. And because the Mojave Desert is facing so many environmental threats, and habitat destruction due to poorly planned development is the main cause of the demise of this ecosystem. These desert habitats are so ecologically specialized and slow to recover from disturbance that they're functionally irreplaceable once destroyed or severely damaged. All these pressures are now in combination with climate change effects, which are an increasing threat to the Mojave Desert and other specialized ecosystems throughout California. So the present day Joshua Tree habitats could act as climate change refugia, increasing the odds of their existence in California's future as we keep pace with habitat shifts due to climate change. Thank you so much for your time.
Phone caller ending in phone number 171. You need to unmute yourself using *6. Phone caller ending in phone number 171. Okay, we'll move on. Ernesto Navarez.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, I live in Morongo Valley. I'm against giving the town of Yucca Valley any responsibility because as far as protecting Joshua trees, they are incompetent. On May 18th, they had a town council meeting in which all 5 council members said what a great job they were doing and how their regulations were sufficient. And yet a couple weeks later, the assistant town manager stated that their regulations were only voluntarily and not enforceable. Second, there is no emergency. There is so much property available, commercial and industrial, because of COVID. Because of COVID, there's a lot of property. This town has a history that I submitted records of for the hearing that they rubber stamp and pencil whip anything and everything that gets to their desk. I believe we need more time to review recent documents that you received in order to be able to respond. Thank you.
David Fick.
Hello, you can hear me. Good afternoon, commissioners. David Fick, 35-year resident of Joshua Tree, vice president of Morongo Basin Conservation Association, and speaking individually though. Today is the 5-month anniversary of the destruction of 10 Joshua trees by a David Webb in Yucca Valley. And what he destroyed 10 Joshua trees on 2 parcels. He was fined $300. And that is something, according to your draft staff report, if he did that activity, it would be about $41,750, which is roughly 130 times less or more than what the $300 fine was. So I don't think Yucca Valley takes this seriously at all. whatsoever. Yucca Valley should be on probation regarding Joshua trees. They've shown themselves to be negligent in enforcement of them for the last 30 years. Maybe they'll have a turnabout, but in the meantime, cut their take in half. For the county and Yucca Valley, cut it in half. Thank you.
Christina Sanchez. You need to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry there. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to speak on item 27. I ask that you can reconsider issuance of 2084 as per requested by the jurisdictions that are requesting it. Speaking from personal experience, the town of Yucca Valley has a history of laxity and of non-compliance in regards to Yucca brevifolia. My prior engagement with code enforcement after reporting an illegal take, the David Webb incident, ended in the code enforcement assistant telling me that the developers could remove a regulated native plant and apply for a native plant permit after the fact. And my having to press them to actually take action, to pursue action on this developer. This is prime example why state level intervention was so needed. From audits of Yucca Valley native plant permit shows years of non-compliance. I highly doubt that a town like Yucca will comply with your regulations since they have a history of non-compliance to their own. I also want to add that the politicians within the community have, I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
Catherine.
Hello, my name is Catherine Tom, and I'm a resident of Joshua Tree. And just to echo a lot of the public comments that have already been shared, I want to also point out that the representative from the Center of Biological Diversity who was involved in this proposal already has concerns. And so I think that in addition to everything else that's been brought up, it seems very clear to me what would be the right decision for this commission to make. And I also just want to highlight that Joshua trees are incredibly slow growing trees. They take generations to grow, and we all need to collectively be paying attention to the real emergency that is the already fragile ecosystem of the Joshua trees and all of the wildlife that depend on them. And I think it's also important to point out that, as a lot of other folks have already shared, it is completely possible for development to take place and not put these trees at risk. Thank you.
Tom Pollock. You need to unmute yourself. Tom Pollock. Okay, we'll move on. C. Quintero.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Columba Quintero. I'm with the Native American Land Conservancy. Thank you, commissioners, for your service and for helping us protect our delicate surroundings. The Native American Land Conservancy works with approximately 32 tribal communities in Southern California to acquire, protect, and preserve sacred ancestral lands. The sacred landscapes and the flora, fauna, and natural and cultural resources therein are fundamental to the cosmologies of local tribal communities and their way of life, and to the teachings that are passed on to the next generations. The beautiful Joshua tree has inhabited the ancestral homelands of local Native Americans since time immemorial. Today, we urge you to please reevaluate the emergency action you are considering and kindly allow for proper community input and consultation. Please help us protect the Western Joshua tree. Thank you. Blessings. Oh.
Okay, last try for phone number ending in 171. Can you unmute yourself? Use *6 on your phone. All right, moving on. Tom Pollock, can you unmute yourself now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Tom Pollock, I'm a retired wildlife biologist. I'm discouraged and disappointed the commission appears to be continuing on the path of unlawful issuance of the so-called emergency endangered species take permits. without correctly complying with the clear mandates of the California Environmental Quality Act. As you all know, California is experiencing a severe biodiversity crisis, and the Commission carelessly handing out endangered species take authority without proper CEQA compliance will only exacerbate the endangered species crisis. I would ask the Commission members to take a collective breath and recognize at this time the people of California do not need poor government decision-making. Thank you very much for your service.
Vice President Murray, we have no more raised hands.
Thank you, Sherry. I had a question, maybe just a couple of questions based on what we heard. And I think these questions are probably for Director Bonham, but others can feel free to weigh in too. We've heard over the last few months where we've been considering Western Joshua trees, we've heard quite a few speakers weigh in and talk about some of the alleged behavior by county governments in terms of their handling of requested permits to take Joshua trees, or just the treatment of Joshua trees overall. Certainly this was before listing or candidacy under CEQA, but we have heard quite a few disturbing and concerning allegations. And a part of this proposal is that we would put some of the enforcement and management responsibilities on these entities and these local governments. And I guess I was just hoping, Director Bonham, that you could speak to what level of engagement we've seen from them, and whether we can expect these local governments to be sort of good actors in this case. And do we have a fail-safe if it goes wrong and if we don't see enforcement and management from these local governments?
Fair question. Compound question. So let me see if I can break it up. And let me first just affirm, in my experience, the individuals on the phone today that are the representatives of the two cities in the county have been extremely professional and have discussed in good faith, I think, in the presence of the petitioner, Center for Biological Diversity. So these individuals themselves, in my opinion, are civil servants at their jurisdictions and have engaged in this discussion with a commitment to get to an outcome that would be more strenuous than their existing ordinances. And I think that idea that it would be more protective than their existing ordinances is a point also captured in Mr. Cummings' comments, at the top of the public comment, right? Now, enough or too little, of course, people are going to debate that, but I do think it's more than existing ordinances would be requiring, frankly, because those ordinances date back to a time before candidacy and are really driven by an entirely different law around native plants in the desert. That is also an important distinction around why, any structure here would be different. You're now in the space of the California Endangered Species Act, and in the second rule package, 74.9.12, there's an express reporting responsibility from these jurisdictions back to us. I think that's distinguishable from what reporting may exist or not. And frankly, if you look at the Desert, kind of Plant Act, it's really about potentially agricultural commissioners more than it is our department, right? From there, look, I don't seek to insert myself into local political dynamics that really are beyond my ability to fully appreciate and live. I'm not in that community, so I'm not able to offer an opinion around council members themselves, folks who may have challenged them in primaries, or supervisors. I don't think it's helpful for any of us, from however you're coming to this discussion, to turn it into good and bad and as to individuals. I think people are trying to navigate for whatever motives they may have. So that's my view on that front. One of the challenges our department is going to face, for what it's worth, and I'm assuming, listing could be an option, right? We need to go through the scientific review, but let's say were listed, our department is going to really struggle at a capacity level to deal with what could be hundreds or thousands of individual project requests, right? That's how this would typically work. Someone would seek an individual permit from us. There are ways within 2081 and ultimately a natural community conservation plan, which is the petitioner's long-term goal potentially, that we could have a regional program where take authorization is allocated to the regional governments. That is the bread and butter construct of an NCCP. And then they in turn are managing the activities within their jurisdictions. So that concept is not, it's not novel, it's not alien. It does require trust, it does require compliance. And it's obvious to me we have a trust and kind of compliance dynamic that's very much underneath all of what you're thinking about here. I also would just say when I hear the conversation, I don't hear a complete, I don't hear anyone arguing about hazard trees, right? I think the discussion is about a different part of the dynamic here, and that's important to note, I think.